Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are watching from. Thank you for your patience, and I look forward to a very productive and fruitful discussion today as of all the latest updates for the Digital Nomad Visa. So, without further ado, let's jump straight in. So today we will be talking about, again, the DNV by the numbers, the application process, and core requirements, proving the qualifications, the financial requirements, special cases, bringing your family, taxes, and social security, and then the Q&A of plus, of course, interweaved with all of this will be all the recent updates already formatted in this way. I wanted to do it this way so that it's not just the updates as of themselves, but the updates as to how it's weaved along with everything else. Okay. So for the numbers that we have, so we are Lakbyte. We were founded back in 2023. And since then, we've helped more than 650 plus individuals move to Spain. And previously, the mix was a bigger percentage of those who applied in the consulate. But starting last year, consulates have been, how would I say it, a little bit more strict with the requirements as well as the implications when you actually get to Spain. So last year, 88% of you applied from within Spain, while only 22% were left via consulates abroad. Now, I foresee that this year this is going to be even lesser. And for the countries that we've assisted, we have a lot of our clients, of course, are Filipinos. We have a lot of American clients, Canadian clients, and we also have from others like Colombia, China, Oman, Israel, Peru, Ukraine, and just 2 days ago we had approvals from a couple from Iran. So we also have from countries like Yemen, Singapore, Thailand. So it's been quite a ride, I would say, for everyone moving here to Spain. Okay, so let's go at the most basic or most introductory requirement. So to qualify for the DNV, one, you must already be working remotely. Two, you must have been with your employer or with your client for at least 3 months. That you don't have to be with them for 1 year, just 3 months enough is enough, 3 months before your application submission. And three, that the company that you're working for must have been established for at least 1 year. So what does this mean? It means that sometimes if you are working for a client, but you're working direct for an individual and they don't have a registered company, then it will be difficult to use that person to actually meet the income requirement. So it has to be a registered company. Okay. Now, so where and how can you apply? So you can apply from abroad. So you will apply at the Spanish consulate in your country of residence and you will receive a 1 year visa. It's a visa sticker that will be stuck onto your passport. And with that visa, you will use it to enter Spain. Now, our most recommended approach, especially given all the changes in 2025, is to actually fly to Spain, enter Spain as a tourist, and apply while you still have Schengen days here. Now, another common misconception that a lot of people think about is that if you enter through Spain or if you apply through Spain, you have to actually fly into a Spanish airport. So sometimes that's not possible just because of the flights that you will get. It's cheaper if you transit through another Schengen country, for example. In those cases, you will just have to get another form. It's called the entry declaration form. And you will just have to have it stamped at the Spanish airport within 72 hours of arrival into Spanish territory. So it's not an issue, even if you don't directly arrive there. Now, this is just a short review for those who joined our last webinar. You might already be familiar with a lot of the concepts here, but for those that are new, welcome. And for those who will see this in the future, welcome as well. So very important terms. You have the NIE, the TIE, and the Padron. So your NIE is essentially your ID number, your identification number in Spain. Your TIE, it's the plastic physical residence card. And your Padron is your proof of address. We will break this down individually in the next slides. So the NIE, or the Número de Identificación de Extranjero, it's basically your foreigner identification number, and it's a number that's assigned to every foreigner wanting to conduct official business in Spain. So it's like a social security number or a tax ID number. How you get it depends on where you apply. So, one, if you're applying from a consulate abroad, then you must obtain your NIE before you can submit your DNP application. So, this whole process can take at least 3 or more months depending on the consulate. Some you can get it in 2 to 3 weeks, some it takes quite a while. So, it really depends as well on how efficient your consulate is. If you apply from Spain with a representative like ourselves, then your NIE will be issued together with your approval letter. So it's not a separate process that you have to apply for. It's already going to be issued together with your approval. Okay. Next is the TIE. So the TIE, it's the physical plastic residence card. It's very similar to a driver's license. It is the card that actually states what your status is, but it's just the physical representation of it. Now, the TIE process will only happen in Spain because first you have to book a fingerprinting appointment at the police station. Now, there I want to be very clear that booking TIE appointments is actually quite a challenge, and it is difficult, and it can take weeks and sometimes months to get. We try as much as possible to book you quick TIE appointments, and lately we've been getting them within 1 to 2 weeks for most of our clients. But just a heads up, if you're watching this can always change because there are seasons when a certain police station becomes extremely difficult to book for, even if previously that police station has had no issues. So secondly, once you've had the appointment, so this is what you call the cita, you will then attend that appointment with your approval letter if you got approved from Spain, or with your visa if you applied from abroad. You'll bring your forms, your photos, your TASA payment, and then you will have your fingerprints taken at that appointment. And then you will receive a receipt after that appointment, and that is what you will use to bring it back 30 to 40 days. Depending again on the station, some stations will require you to actually book a second pickup appointment to pick up the card, whereas others you can just go in to pick it up. So again, it's very station specific, and as you will know, it is very Spain. Like sometimes something works today, sometimes it doesn't the next day. Okay, and then what is the padron, or the empadronamiento? It's basically your official proof of address. It's a certificate from your local town hall saying that you're a resident of that municipality or of that city. So you usually will need it for your TIE appointment, because there are certain police stations in certain provinces that will not process your TIE unless you actually have your padron. Now, note that in provinces like Madrid and Barcelona, there are two specific stations, the one in Rambla and the one in Santa Ignacia, where you can book specialty appointments which you do not need a padron for, especially if you applied from within Spain. So in most other provinces, it is required. However, there are again a few select stations where we are able to get clients their TIE without it. So how do you get the padron? Normally, you will have to prove a rental contract, and that rental contract must be at least 6 months. And then sometimes they will ask for proof of a utility bill, proof of the rent payment. And then you bring this to your local town hall. Some town halls will issue it on the very same day. Some will actually ask you to come back. Some will even conduct a housing inspection to make sure that you actually live in the place. So again, it very much depends on where and how you do it. Okay. So now these are samples of how these documents look like. So on the left-hand side, this is a sample approval letter from the UHE. The second one is a sample NIE if you obtain the NIE from the consulate. And then the third one, it's a sample padron, which you will see it shows your name, your address, etc. Now, lastly, this is a sample TIE, which is a plastic physical residence card, which actually shows what your status here in Spain is. Okay. So what is the difference if applying in Spain and the consulate? So if you apply in Spain, you don't have to provide an NIE, or you don't have to obtain a NIE beforehand. Secondly, you don't have to provide medical insurance unless you're applying as an employee. And thirdly, you don't have to undergo a medical exam. So that medical exam will say that you don't suffer from any diseases according to the International Health Regulations of 2005. So when we did this webinar before, the other difference here, if you were applying in Spain and the consulate, was not having to prove any tax returns or tax registration of any sort. However, starting December of last year, it's now been a requirement that if you apply as autonomo or if you apply as a self-employed individual, then you will actually have to show proof of self-employed registration in your country of origin. Very often, these are tax registration documents. So this is why it used to be a fourth item that differed between a consulate and a Spain application. However, that difference has now disappeared. Okay. Next, so managing your timeline. I always get asked how long will it take me to actually prepare the documents or to submit. And again, it entirely will depend on you. So for document collection and document submission, for the total timeline, there are always two phases. So one is the document preparation phase. So this is when you collect everything. And then second is the government processing phase, which is after submission. Okay. So for document preparation timeline, so the fastest that we've done it for someone was 1 week. Again, this is rare. It requires all documents to be immediately available. Preferably, you reach out to us 1 to 2 months. That is already actually quite tight. Um, However, most applicants are able to collect all their documents within that time. If you don't want to be rushing and if you want it to be a smooth process, we usually recommend that you get the documents 3 to 6 months, or we are engaged 3 to 6 months before you actually submit your application. So, key delay factors that you have to think about when you are thinking about your timeline of the move and the submission. So, if you come from a country where you do not have Schengen visa free entry, then applying for a Schengen visa can take some time. So, there are some embassies or consulates that process it quite quickly, so you can get it in hand in 1 to 2 weeks. However, there are also some that take at least a month. Now, next is getting a NIE from a consulate. If you're applying via the consulate, the time that it takes to get the NIE will also impact your timeline because you cannot submit your application without that. And for example, as mentioned, for applicants in the Philippines, it can take 3+ months on its own. In Thailand, recently we've had someone who was able to get it in 3 to 4 weeks. Historically, in Japan, they've been able to issue it in 2 weeks. So again, it really depends on how efficient your consulate is. Another item that takes a while are degree documents. So some countries require certain formalities before they apostille degrees, whereas other countries directly apostille it with not much issue. So that will again depend. For US applicants, the most common source of delay is the FBI check. So the check itself is quite quick, but it's the apostille that can take at least 14+ weeks. Because of all the recent changes as well, another thing that actually also takes quite long for US applicants, or that can sometimes impact submission, is if you are applying as a W-2 employee and you are obtaining a certificate of coverage. Sometimes they're quick, sometimes they're not. But again, it will also impact the timing of when you can submit your application. For UK applicants, on the other one, it's the A1 certificate, which can take 16+ weeks. And then last, a new update as to one of the other things that you have to look for when it comes to timeline is your proof of self-employed registration. So right now, what we're seeing is that the requirements that the UHE has been issuing is that you just have to show proof of self-employed registration. It doesn't have to actually state that it's been at least for 3 months. However, remember that the law actually specifically states that you must have been working for at least 3 months for a client. So it's not too much of a big leap to, at least if you have time, to make sure that your documents are on the up and up. that you make sure that that proof of self-employed registration has been in place for at least 3 months. Now, we'll talk about workarounds later on when we go specifically to the slide on self-employed registration. Okay. And then next is government processing timeline. This is the time that it takes the Spanish government to actually decide and approve your application. So again, if you're applying from a consulate abroad, you will be subject to the whims and efficiency of that consulate. And officially, under the law, the official target is that they will issue decisions within 10 working days. And there are again consulates that respect this, notably consulates like Japan, Thailand, Singapore. The reality is it often takes much longer. So it can take 30 plus working days. Our longest, for example, in the Philippines was 4 months. We currently have an application that's pending for 3 months. Other consulates take even longer. So, for example, Bangladesh, Egypt can take even up to 10 months. And there's no guarantee and there's no administrative silence policy. Okay. If you apply from Spain via the UHE, the official target is 20 working days, and this deadline is generally respected. So, the advantage here, if you apply in the UHE, is if they don't respond in that 20 working day period, your application is automatically approved by administrative silence. So, that is what a lot of people really like when they apply in the UHE, on top of the fact that versus a 1 year visa, you will actually get a 3 year residence authorization. Okay. So frequently asked questions and tips for when it comes to timeline. So how far in advance can you apply? So if the consulate, you can apply up to 6 months before your planned travel date. If you apply in Spain, you have to apply while you are on validly in Spain, meaning you are a resident, you are a tourist with visa-free days that and you still have Schengen days, or if you came here on a tourist visa that your tourist visa hasn't expired, or you could also come over. We have a lot of applicants who come over as former digital nomads in Malta, from Hungary, for example, so or even from Italy, and then they come over and then apply. As long as you have a valid right to be in Spanish territory, then you can submit your application. Now, a very common question that we get is, what if my tourist visa expires or I run out of Schengen days while I wait? So as long as you've actually submitted your application, then you can legally remain in Spain while the application is pending, even after your visa expires, right? And then the next question is, what if I don't hear back after 20 days? So this is what we were mentioning earlier, that your application will be considered approved by administrative silence, and then we will then go ahead and request an official approval letter for you. Okay. Okay, this is also a recent change, especially after September of last year. So before, what most people did was they obtained the 1 year visa from the consulate, and then they immediately transitioned to a 3 year residence authorization upon landing in Spain. However, what we saw starting in September was that when we submitted the reapplication for the 3 year residence authorization, they were inadmissible for the reason that we did not submit it 60 days before the expiry of the 1 year visa. Of course, we did not let that rest, considering that we've had numerous approvals already of those who directly transitioned. So what we did was we did refile for quite a few, as well as timed it in certain times where we knew or we had a reasonable expectation that that the application would go into administrative silence. So over the period between September to November, we had over 40 refilings, with the latest being towards the end of November, which we deliberately timed so that they would fall into admin silence and they would push through. Now, as of today, we only have, as of yesterday, actually, only have 3 pending cases that are inadmissible. And for those cases, these have already been appealed on the basis that they should have been accepted based on previous approvals in exactly the same situation. Because of this, we do not recommend relying on a 1 year visa unless you have no other choice. For example, if it's difficult for you to come over via Schengen visa, or if you've overstayed previously and that it is becoming a challenge. So right now, our advice really is it is 100% better to actually submit your application within Spain. So that's either if you use a Schengen visa or if you do a visa-free entry. Okay. So in Spain, DNV application process. So step one, before you fly, and again, preferably 3 to 6 months before you plan to submit the application, you'll get all your documents, your contracts, your client documents, your criminal records, ready in your home country. And all documents are valid 6 months from their date of issue, not from their date of apostille. So you just have to look at the issuance date. And then again, then you fly to Spain, you prove your entry, and then prove that you're validly in Spanish territory. If you fly into a Spanish airport, whether it's Barajas, El Prat in Barcelona, or the Valencia airport, as long as you get a stamp, not an issue. However, again, as mentioned earlier, if you entered by another Schengen country, for example, you flew into Frankfurt and then from Frankfurt you flew to Madrid, then you will just have to get an extra entry declaration form that you will have stamped at the police station at the Madrid office, at the Madrid airport. And lastly, once we have all of those documents, you will just upload that to our portal or you send it to whoever is assisting you, and they will submit your application as the application is done entirely online. On our end, as long as we receive the documents before 3 p.m. of the same day, the application is usually filed on the same day. If it's afterwards, it's filed on the next working day. So how long do you have to stay for submission? So technically, we just need 1 day since we only have to be physically here in Spain on the day that you submit. However, we usually ask for 3 days, at least from our clients, because sometimes the system does go down and it doesn't allow us to submit. And this gives us a little bit of leeway. And once the application is submitted, you can travel around. You can travel around Spain. You can travel around Europe. It doesn't matter. The only time that you really have to be physically here is on the day of submission. Okay. So another of the common questions we get is should they stay or should they go? And it really depends on the visa that you have. So if it's a single entry Schengen visa, you must stay in Spain until you are approved. So leaving after we've submitted your application and then you get approved means you cannot re-enter on the same visa because the DNV approval document is not a valid travel document in and of itself. So if you have a single entry Schengen visa, you can either stay or alternatively, you'll have to get another separate single entry Schengen visa to return if you've exited the Spanish or Schengen territory. But of course, if you've stayed, then no issues. You will just go directly to your TA appointment. Next is if you get the multiple entry Schengen visa. So this is gives you maximum flexibility. You can enter Spain to apply. Again, we recommend at least 3 to 5 days, and then leave and wait for the decision elsewhere. So it can be another country, it can be your home country. However, it's important to note that it's not only the fact that it's a multiple entry Schengen visa that must be taken into consideration. You must also take a look at the length of the visa validity, because let's say it's a multiple entry visa, but it's only valid for 10 days. Then obviously we will not be able to use that for purposes of flying back because the decision takes at least 20 working days. I hope that's clear. So lastly, if it's visa-free entry, so if you're coming from the US, the UK, Australia, so it's like a multiple entry visa. So you can enter, apply, and then leave, and then you just return once you're approved. As long as you have a valid 90 Schengen days or still Schengen days remaining, then that should not be an issue. Okay. So approval and the TA card. So step one, so wait for approval. So current processing as of January 2026, it's very slow. So they are taking the full 20 working days to decide. They've sped up by 1 or 2 days. So before I would say towards the end of December, they were sending additional document requests as of the last day. So day 20, and then you get an additional document request. Right now, some have been getting it on day 18, others still on day 20. What we're also seeing is a lot of the main applicants' applications are being processed. So we get additional document requests for those, or they're being approved. However, dependents' applications are being skipped. So we have quite a few approvals this week where the main applicant has been approved, but the dependents are still waiting. But usually, if the main applicant is approved, the dependents will eventually follow. It's just that it does take time. And again, remember that it's legally approved by administrative silence after 20 working days. So step two is approval and fingerprinting. So you receive your 3-year residence approval letter, and then we will book a TIE appointment for you, and you will go and attend that appointment. Now, what if your again visa or your 90 days expires before you get the TIE card? So option A is you can wait in Spain before your TIE. And option B is if you need to get a travel document or a regreso. So note that you can only attend a regreso appointment after you've attended the TIE appointment. The regreso, it functions like a Schengen visa in that it will allow you to enter and exit Spain um, within that 90-day period of its validity, because usually the regreso is issued for a period of 90 days, or if it is a regreso that you obtained after renewal, it's going to be tied to the validity of that renewal. Now, note that if you use a regreso, you must validly fly directly into a Spanish airport. So remember earlier that to submit an application, it didn't matter if you entered via, let's say, Frankfurt, Munich, Italy, Rome. However, if you are using a regreso to fly out and in and out of Spain, you have to move back in a Spanish airport. Now, for step four, this should be step four, is open a bank account and sign up as autonomo. Now, we have always recommended that our clients do this quickly, especially since you have actually signed up. One of the documents that you submit when you submit the application is the declaration that you will sign up and register as autonomo and for social security once that you have been approved. Now, what been seeing is that the UHE has started clamping down on those that take a while to register. So before, we saw it usually after 6 months from approval and non-registration. Recently, we've been seeing posts from fellow consultants as well. For those who were approved in September and hadn't still signed up as autonomous. We have had one notification for a similar case, and that person was also approved in September. Now, another common misconception that a lot of people think is that you can only sign up as autonomo once you have your TIE, which is not true. You can already sign up as autonomo as long as you have a bank account and your approval letter. That's all that's really needed, and most testers who are familiar with this process will be able to sign you up. The challenge here is actually bank access. So there are certain nationalities, especially if their country is a part of the FATF country, listed country, it becomes more difficult for them to access or open Spanish bank accounts. So what we normally advise again clients is that you can just try with different banks, because with Spain, within a different bank, within a different person who is assisting you, the experience will vary very wildly. So for those cases, you can just like try different banks, especially now, because it's not an issue if you delay registration and you receive an UHE notice. Of course, it's not the best situation to be in, but we did successfully defend a client in this exact same situation last September. They were approved in November but hadn't been able to sign up as autonomo until September last year. However, the UHE will then ask you to backdate the registration as of the day of approval. And the implications are that you will lose the benefit of the flat rate for Social Security in the first year, and there will be penalties and surcharges that will be imposed. for, and then of course you'll have to pay the corresponding taxes and social security payments on a graduated rate for all the months that you've missed. So it's defensible. We've defended it, and the client has kept their authorization, but it is expensive. So if you are thinking of, say, delaying it for to delay the expense, we what I say to that is don't, as you will effectively end up spending more. Okay. So path forward, renewals, residency and citizenship. So usually it's a 3+2 structure. So you initially get the residence authorization for 3 years, and then you will get an extension, or you can apply for an extension of 2 years. So that's years 4 and 5. And then after 5 years, the path to long-term residency and citizenship opens up. Now, the first renewal will usually happen 60 days before your 3-year residence authorization expires. Or if you are here on a certificate of coverage or the A1 certificate, usually towards the end of the second year. On renewal, you will usually receive a 2-year residence authorization, and it's effectively like starting all over again. It's effectively as if you were submitting a new application in and of itself. Okay, next, let's talk about the 183-day myth. So a lot of people think two things about the 183-day rule. First is that to maintain residency, they just have to be here for 183 days, right? Another misconception here is that people think that if they haven't been here for 183 days, then they don't have to register as autonomous and start paying taxes. So both impressions are wrong. So first is the 183-day rule is you definitely have to stay at least 183 days in a year, so that your residency authorization will not be canceled. So it's one of the things that you have to comply with. And however, in and of itself, if you stay that long, this doesn't mean that it's already sufficient for purposes of citizenship or long-term residency, as those have different periods for them. On the other hand, the 183-day myth when it comes to tax payments is also incorrect, because the moment that you are actually working here, invoicing clients, even if they are based abroad, then you will still, of course, be liable to pay taxes here. So you don't have to wait until you've been here for 183 days, especially once you've signed up as autonomous. Okay. Okay, so path to long-term residency. So these are for those who do not have the expedited option towards citizenship. So again, it's 3 years plus the 2-year renewal, and then you can apply for long-term residency. And this, of course, means that you must have not spent outside of Spain more than 10 months in total during the 5-year period, or not more than 6 consecutive months at any time. So obviously the 183-day rule, if you just stick to that every year, will make you fall out of this window, which means that you will have to keep renewing your DNB for 2 years at a time until you meet the 5-year residency qualification. Now, if you are a Spanish, if you belong to the Philippines or an Ibero-American country, so you will be eligible for Spanish citizenship within 2 years after approval. Now, we already have, from all our clients that have applied, we've submitted an application in August. We also have, as of today, 3 who've already met the 2-year residency guidelines. So we will be submitting their applications within the next 2 weeks for citizenship. And I was already looking at those others in the coming few months. So there are quite a few who will be eligible for their citizenship already in the next few months, or even in the next few weeks. For if unfortunately you don't belong to any of these fast track countries, it will have to be for 10 years. Plus, of course, the language test, as well as the cultural and social exam. Okay, so we can run through this very quickly, but for all your documents, especially if your documents are official government documents, they will always have to be legalized for use in Spain. So the easiest, of course, is if your country, or if the country that issued your document comes from a country that is part of the Hague Apostille Convention. So it's usually just a single official stamp or an extra piece of paper that is appended to the document to show that this document has been validly issued in the country of origin. Because of course, Spain doesn't know what documents other countries are issuing, and the apostille is the way for a document that is issued in another country to be actually recognized and used in Spain. Now, the more complicated path is if, for example, the country that issued your document isn't part of the Apostille Convention. So you have to first bring that document to your country's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and then afterwards you bring it to have it legalized by the Spanish embassy or consulate in your country. So, for example, countries like Thailand, Malaysia, Iran, all of these countries are not part of the Apostille Convention, so you always have to do the Ministry of Foreign Affairs plus consulate dance for all of these. Okay, so let's talk about the documents required. So I've again created a simple list of documents that you can look at and whether it needs apostille or sworn translation. So this last part that's covered by my image here is insurance. We'll get to that later. So for every client that you use to apply, you will always need three things. One is your contract with them, whether that's a current freelance or employment contract. Second is the letter from the client authorizing remote work. And third is the certificate of incorporation from the client company, again showing that they've been registered for at least 3 years. So for most of the documents, you will see that they will need sworn translation. So if you see here the sworn translation column, it's always going to be a check. Except of course for your financial documents, your CV, and then your insurance, because the insurance documents are usually already issued in Spanish and English. For apostille, you will see in this column that usually it will only apply to those that are issued by government entities. So, for example, the certificate of incorporation, the criminal check. So, whether that's the FBI check from the US, the NBI if you're in the Philippines, the ACRO certificate if you're from the UK, marriage or birth certificates, educational credentials, government documents proving work, as well as the latest, the newest request, which is proof of self-employed registration. Now, remember for the country, let's go back here to the third requirement, which is the certificate of incorporation. It can also be a certificate of good standing. It can be a certificate of fact. It can be any certificate as long as it proves that the company or it has the registration date of the company, right? So now, marriage or birth certificates, you will only need for dependents, you only need to prove the relationship to the main applicant. So for a spouse, it's a marriage certificate. For children, it's birth certificates. Educational credentials depends again on the country, but for example, from the Philippines, you will need to obtain what is called the CAV or the CAV. It's the certification, authentication, and verification. And it will again depend whether you come from a public or a private university. If it's a public university, you will have to reach out to your registrar, and they will usually ask you for your certified true copy of a TOR and your degree and your diploma. Whereas if it's a private university, still the same thing, certified true copy of your diploma and your TOR. But if they are part of the ECAV portal, you can even complete this entire process online. Okay. And then official government documents proving work. So these are tax or social security documents proving that during the years that you allege for years of experience, you actually were working. And then you also have previous COEs again to prove your years of experience. We will talk more about proof of self-employed registration in a bit, and I foresee that there will be a lot of questions when it comes to this later on. Okay. Next, financial documents. So your bank statements, your invoices, your payslips if you're employed, proof of the transfer on your behalf. Your CV, there's no required format, can be any as long as it proves your years of experience. And then your insurance. So you only really need insurance if you're applying in a consulate, since they require it, even if technically you will be covered by public health care. And secondly, if you are applying as an employee. Okay. Now let's go to the core qualifications. So you have to show that you either have a degree that is related to your current position or that you have 3 years of professional experience. So for the degree, it can be a bachelor's, a graduate, or postgraduate degree. Doesn't matter as long as it's a relatively validly issued degree, and it must be apostilled. So in again towards the end of November at the conference for immigration lawyers, one of the issues that popped up was that it was alleged that those that are qualified or those that are going to be considered under a regulated profession, for example, psychologists, lawyers, architects, civil engineers, will have to again homologate their degree. And note that this process can take 2 to 3 years, depends. Effectively, it takes a long time. However, just as in December, we had a few who we were able to get approved with just a formal declaration saying that they will not be practicing their degree here within Spain. And just last night, we had another approval. So very, very fresh approval for someone that we did that's something similar for, where we just made the declaration instead of homologating the degree. So I can confirm that as of today, it still is a valid path. Okay. Now, what about if you have 3 years of professional experience? Again, this one is also very common for misadvice or misunderstood. It's also sometimes misunderstood. So to prove 3 years of experience, you always need two things. One is the certificate of experience from either your former client or for your former employer, showing your position, how long you've been with them, the what you did. However, it must always be accompanied by official government documents proving that you were actually working during that time. So usually it's tax or social security documents. So for example, if you are from the Philippines, it's the SSS certificate, so tax returns, whether it's the ones as a self-employed individual under 1701A or 2316 as an employee. If you're from the US, it's usually tax returns showing self-employment, like Schedule C in the Form 1040, 1099 forms, or W2 tax. If you're from the UK, usually the work life history from the HMRC will work. If you don't have this yet, so usually, especially if you come from a country where it's not, where a lot of people don't pay their taxes, the only real alternative now is back payment of taxes for the last 3 years. Previously, we were able to swing it with proof of payment transfers from previous clients during those years, but they've tightened it up now, and now they're really looking for official government documents and not just transfers over those years. Okay, so letter authorizing remote work, very non-negotiable. You must include details like the position, your job description, and then how long you've been with them, salary or pay impressed in euros, and the explicit authorization to work remotely in Spain. Okay, now let's take to the most recent update as of the documents that are being required for those who are applying as autonomo or as self-employed individuals for the digital nomad visa for Spain. So it is any official government document, and I do mean any because over in December, we until today, we have had 29 main applicants who were affected or who have been affected by this document request. So what you can show and what is the most commonly shown is what I put first is the annual tax return showing independent activity. So one of the very common issues that affected all those who submitted in December was it was a new requirement and no one had prepared for it other than those that had already had all their tax documents lined up. So the easiest way to prove that it's been more than 3 months that you've been registered is if you have an annual tax return because it will cover the entire year. So for example, we had a lot of people who either submitted their 2024 return when we were applying last year, and for those who were submitting this year, the 2025 return. So all for the income last year. Now what we did for most of our clients was that we knew that this requirement was coming. So it happened on a Thursday of December. I think it was December 4. So on the December 4, on the night of December 4, we received five notifications, all containing these requirements. So we immediately informed all of our clients by December 5 to start preparing and look for alternatives based on their specific circumstances. When all the notifications came out towards the mid of December, the end of December, we of course delayed opening it to allow our clients to obtain the necessary documents, which most of we submitted in January, because it's not only obtaining the document, but of course also apostilling the document. Others that we've seen used is tax registry enrollment or census of activities, registration with showing that you're self-employed, or social security registration. So proof of tax payments, VAT, GST, income return, commercial or municipal business license, or chamber of commerce registration, or a sole proprietorship registration. We've all seen this work. For the Philippines, very common. It's the tax return, the certificate of registration, or BIR 2303. Another thing that's also very common is the SSS certificate. We've seen some local barangay certificates as self-employed also being used. For the US, usually it's the tax returns, either 1099 or Schedule C of their return, which shows self-employment income. There are other countries as well that we had to figure out what was available. So again, for other countries, it was a tax return showing self-employed activity, or some sort of certificate which says, or which explicitly provided that they were self-employed. Others, we also showed affiliation with the social security entity of their country. So it's all around these. So if we can defend and show it around these types of documents, then you should be good. Okay. Next. So next is the income. So for 2025, the income is as here to the right. So if you're one applicant, it's 2763, 3799, etc. It hasn't increased yet. It's still being discussed, but of course, the figures are gross before tax. You cannot combine your income with a spouse's to meet the income requirement. And this income requirement is based to Spain's minimum wage. So it's usually updated annually to account for inflation and other expenses. Now, what if you don't meet the income? So, well, one, you can ask for a raise. Secondly, you can add a new client. You can use as many clients as you can to apply. We even have had a few who applied using 5 clients just to meet the income. You can also negotiate a guaranteed bonus, so that when you average the 3 months out before you submit the application, then you meet the income requirement. Another thing that other people do is they work and bill for overtime in the 3 months leading up to their submission. So all are valid ways to beef up your income. So this is how the income has increased over the past few years. So historically, it's been a 3 to 5% increase. Now, right now, we are here as to the monthly income requirement for 2025, right? So I've calculated if it's a 3% or if it's a 5% increase here. And note that this isn't official, these are just estimated figures. Now, if it's a 3% increase, it's going to increase to around 2,850 euros if you're an individual. Whereas if it's a 5% increase, it's going to go to 2,900. If you are a couple or a unmarried partners, it's going to be around 3,913 or 3,989 if you go for a 5% increase. If you are a family of 4, it's going to be 4,600, around 4,600 or 4,700 if it's a 5% increase. Okay. So you must always create a clear financial story for your financials, right? So it will be invoices or pay slips for the past 3 months before you apply. You will also have to show bank statements for the last 3 months showing the deposit, and it must clearly show that it is the client or it is the employer that you are that is paying you to actually provide the services. So usually we always not usually, we always create for our clients a financial tracing cover letter to present and show that they meet the income requirement because this is how much they are earning. So common platforms that we see most of our applicants come from or be paid through is Upwork, very, very common. Wise, I said it before, I'll say it again, it still remains to be my favorite way for our clients to be paid because it's very clear as to who the sender is, as well as how much it's being sent, and it can be downloaded directly in Spanish. Then PayPal, Payoneer, Veeam, Gusto, Deal, and Remote.com. So very, very common, especially for Deal, for contractors. Okay. Now, using savings to supplement income, it's still a very valid strategy. And what we usually recommend is the difference between how much you're actually supposed to earn multiplied by 36 months because the residence authorization is for 3 years. So it has to be a bank certificate, preferably stamped or signed with the bank, and preferably in a separate account than the account that is used to receive income. Sometimes they accept that it's in the same account. Sometimes they request that it's in a separate account. So normally we just say first and foremost to just have it in a separate account. Okay. Now, who can apply for the digital nomad visa? So majority, and I do say this until now, it still is the case. Majority are still freelancers or contractors. Applying as an employee is still again possible, but only in specific condition. So there's only two paths to apply as an employee. So first is the path least traveled, I would say. Most companies aren't willing to do this because it involves them registering an entity in Spain. So they must register a representative office with no physical presence in Spain. And then they must register you and pay your social security contributions in Spain. The second pathway is if your country has a social security agreement between your country and Spain. And importantly, that social security agreement must cover remote workers or telework because there are a lot of countries with social security agreements in Spain, but it doesn't cover telework. So, for example, the Philippines. If, for example, your country is covered by the agreement, let's say the UK, the US, Canada, this is confirmed with a certificate of coverage from that social security institution from that country. Now, so right now, the list of countries with applicable treaties include UK, Russia, Colombia, Chile, and China, most of the EU countries. And this one, again, very interesting history here. It covers USA and Canada. So if you're a W-2 employee as of January 2026, we've still had approvals for these types of applications. However, it does come with a warning sign, and which I will bring in the second slide. So for employee applications and certificates of coverage, this is where I say that there is an interesting history because from April to November of 2025, employee applications with certificates of coverage were approved with no issues. Now, for per around mid-November to early December, they started denying applications for even with certificates of coverage. So what we did for an applicant, since we had one applicant pending with a certificate of coverage as a W-2 employee for US at that time, we told them that we would wait for the immigration conference to finish so that we will see what the results are, as well as see how other fellow consultants have been doing it, and as well as liaising with the UHE with what was possible. We did eventually find a way, and it's now required, it's now a standard that if you are using a certificate of coverage from a country like the US, you have to make sure that the application is structured to show that the application is a posted worker being sent to live in Spain. So since the change in November, we've been able to secure 3 US W2 COC approvals. So it still works, but it has to be structured correctly. Okay, so now how do you know if you're an employee or a contractor? So you are likely an employee if your company withholds and pays your taxes, social security, and provides benefits on your behalf, or if you're within the same country as your employer. So you are likely a contractor even if you work full time for the company. If the company is based abroad, you're being paid by an employer like through Deal or remote.com. Um, but depends also because you can be engaged by Deal as a contractor, or you can also be engaged via Deal and remote.com as an employer of record. So in those cases, you will be considered an employee. So it really depends on the exact structure of your of your work relationship. But you will just normally, the easiest tell is if they withhold taxes and social security benefits automatically on your behalf. Okay, and of course, as mentioned earlier, you must have been engaged with them for at least 3 months before you apply in the specific type of engagement that you will be applying for the DNB for, because it can happen that you are with the company for at least 10 years, but you need to apply as a contractor because the country that you come from, for example, the Philippines, doesn't have a social security agreement that qualifies. So even if you've been in the company for 10 years, you have to shift over and become a contractor at least 3 months before we submit the application. Okay, so we are down to our last few slides. So we will be talking about very quickly about taxes, social security, and who you can bring on the DNP. So for employees, whether they're under Path 1 or 2, they are eligible for Beckham's Law, which will give them a flat 24% tax rate on Spanish income. For contractors, we are not eligible for the Beckham's Law, and you will pay taxes on a graduated scale between 19 to 47% or higher, depending on your income. So it's not 47% on the entire amount, it's just levels which will be taxed at that higher rate. So is Beckham's always better? Actually, no. You will actually sometimes pay lesser if you're on the graduated income if you don't reach the threshold. Okay, now let's talk about special cases. So sole proprietors and company owners. Before, it was said that you could apply using your own company without any distinction. Now it seems like they are closing the path where you accredit your own company and you apply as a company owner. So right now what we've been seeing that still works is if you structure it where your company is your client and you are engaged as self-employed with them. Another key change recently, especially in December, is for those who are transitioning from a student visa to the DNV. So we have had denials. We have had the two denials for those who are transitioning for a student visa to the DNB on the basis that they did not have the right to work in Spain while under the student visa. Well, we've also had two that have gone through without no issues. So again, this also has had a very interesting history. In February last year, we experienced the same with two of our clients as well, but we reapplied in April with a memo attached that this doesn't it isn't covered. This isn't what the rules say. Ever since, we have always appended said memo or a similar memo for all of our student visa transitionees. However, it seems like on December that they are tightening up again, because for those, we've also had those that eventually got approved, but we had to prove certain things before they were approved. So it helps if your TIE actually says that you do have a right to work, but it isn't a guarantee. So for those that were denied, of course, we are appealing those and reapplying for those that still can. Okay. For other special cases, NGOs or foundations, still possible. And then for crypto professionals, also still possible. And you just have to make sure it's structured in the correct way. And if you watched our previous webinar, then you will know that I do have a fintech and blockchain background, and it really helps for these kinds of applications. So it doesn't matter if you're paid by USDC, USDT, etc., as long as we structure the application correctly. Okay, so who can you bring on the digital nomad visa? So you can bring your spouse or your unmarried partner, so your boyfriend or your girlfriend. You can bring them. You can bring your children, whether they're minor or whether they're adults, and it can be your children or the children of your spouse or your unmarried partner. And then again, you can bring your parents, so whether it's your parents or the parents of your spouse or your dependent partner. Okay, so latest update is we've had 21 of 21 unmarried couples approved, and I would say that we were one of the earliest to actually specialize in getting these types of couples their approval. So if you're bringing a spouse, again, you'll just have to show the apostille marriage certificate, and then online marriage certificates, especially through states like, for example, Utah. As long as it's state issued and apostille, those will also work. If you have a common child and you're an unmarried partner, that is also very strong proof of the strength of your relationship. But we always include a notarial declaration together with these unmarried partner applications. So it's easiest if you register in a de facto partnership registry, or if you go through the Pareja de Hecho process in Spain. So we've done it already for clients in Barcelona, Valencia, Granada, and Murcia. If there's no registry, then you will have to prove at least 1 year of cohabitation with at least two of the following: a joint property or rental contract, shared residence registration, joint ownership of a business, and joint bank account. Okay. For children, for minor children, it's easier. You just have to show birth certificate. For adopted children, the adoption certificate, again, apostilled. And if only one parent is moving, you will, of course, have to prepare and notarize an apostille affidavit of consent from the non-joining parent. So if they're adult children, they have to prove that they are economically dependent, that they don't have any benefits or have a smaller amount of benefits, and that they don't have not constituted a family of their own. Now, if they are adult children, we've had 3 of 3 adult children approved, but usually it requires some sort of medical incapacity for them to be approved. Okay. Dependent parents, as of now, we've had 7 out of 7 parents approved. And again, it applies to parents of the main applicant or their spouse or unmarried partner. So if the parents are over 80, they are presumed dependent. And it's best if you show at least 1 year financial support and that they have no significant income or pension, as well as medical or social service reports. So these are always challenging applications, I would say. There are numerous documents that you will have to obtain for this. So we normally recommend not doing this yourself, or at least engaging, if not us, a qualified professional who is familiar with these types of applications. Okay. So it's also possible to apply and add family members after you initially arrive and submit your application, right? So if, for example, the initial application did not show that you had enough income for the number of family members you are adding, then you must provide updated financial documents for the 3 months before you submit their family members application. You must also make sure that you are actually registered for as autonomo before you actually add them. So that's very important. Okay. One of the things that we are also still proud of is the workaround where dependents can apply from abroad. So we first tested this in October of 2024. We succeeded in February 2025 again, and then in April 2025 and beyond, where only the main applicant flew to Spain and then the dependents remained in the home country for purposes of the application, and then the dependents just joined here in Spain after. Okay. Now, how do approved dependents get to Spain? So it's now very clear with all especially with all the changes, that if you are approved as a dependent applying from outside of Spain, then you will have to finish or activate, that's the term I use, or we between consultants, that to activate the 3-year residence authorization, even if you already have the 3-year residence approval, you will have to apply for the 1-year digital nomad visa as a family member of an international teleworker in the consulate of your country of residence. So it is now not possible to just fly here, whether it's Schengen visa free entry or if it's a Schengen visa, if you applied from abroad for your dependent. if you want them to directly fly here, the best thing or the better thing to do is just not submit their application until they actually come over on a valid Schengen visa. Okay. Okay, can you work for companies in Spain? So, if you are a self-employed individual or unemployed individual, you will not be able to apply as an employee, and you cannot do in-person work. If you are a freelancer, you can work up to 20% for Spanish companies, but it must be on a remote freelance basis. So you really can't be in person. However, for family members who are accompanying you, they do have the right to work up to 100%. So they can be employees, they can be self-employed, or they can even open up their own business. Okay. So for Social Security, we are almost finished. Just hang on a little bit. For Social Security, it will depend on how much that you will pay. So for year one, if you're a contractor, it's a flat rate of around 80 euros. And some regions like Andalusia, Madrid, and Murcia will offer 100% subsidy. From year two onwards, it is a significant increase based on your income. For employees, you will normally continue paying for your SS in your home country, and then if you have a certificate of coverage, if you are here because your company registered you with the Spanish Social Security, then your employer will pay the contributions on your behalf. Okay. So income tax, again, graduated scale of 19 to 47%, and it is a progressive system. So only income falling into the higher brackets is taxed at the higher rate. It is not a flat rate on the entire income. Again, we always share this. It's the tax calculator to foresee how much you will be paying in taxes and social security. So that's autonomoinfo.com. And then again, if you're an employee, you will be eligible for Beckham's Law at a flat 24% tax rate. Okay. So again, as mentioned earlier, it's not always the best choice, especially if you're at lower amounts, since you actually sometimes pay less on the graduated scales. Okay, so we are in our last two slides. So this is a first year income breakdown for someone who is based in Madrid. So the first column for applicants for monthly income of 2,763 euros, your tax percentage is around an 18%. SSS is around 80. And then the total SS and tax percentage will be 20.69%. If you're a couple, if you're an unmarried partner for 3,799, tax is around 22.19%. And the SSS plus tax total percentage is around 23.8%. So this is the tax column, and this is what I was saying, that it's sometimes lower than 24% depending on how much you're actually earning. So this is for the first year. So I also did a breakdown for the second year onwards, simply because this is where a lot of people get surprised that their social security jumps quite high. So for one applicant who's earning around 2,763, the tax rate will actually lower on the second year, so it's around 16.93%. But the SS amount does jump from 80 to 426, and the effective total SS and tax percentage is around 30%. So it's going to be a 30 to around 33% depending on how many dependents you bring over. So for example, if you're a family of with 4,490 euros monthly, the tax percentage is 22%, but SS will be around 544 euros for an effective total rate of 32%. Okay. So we are at the end of our presentation. I hope that you learned something today with all the updates that we've shared. And these are actually a results of all the additional document requests that we've gotten for our clients and eventually gotten approved, as well as all of the communication with the UHE, as well as fellow consultants that do the DNV day by day. Okay. So if you have any questions, you can always reach out via our contact email, which is info@lakbyte.com, or you can also visit our website, lakbyte.com, there is a consultation link that you can avail of. We were previously booked until the middle of February, but I did open a few end of day slots so that people could avail of consultation faster. If you need priority urgent consultations, we do also have Saturday priority consultations, but please send an email to request such on our info@lakbyte.com email.